It's now time for this month's broadcast of Learning Now TV.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Learning Now TV. Nigel, how are you doing?
Doing well, Kate. A little bit of a sore arm because I've been jabbed, but I've never had a more happy sore arm experience in my life. I'm delighted.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear it. I hope you at home are staying well, keeping safe. Hope lots of you have been jabbed as well. But enough about that. Nigel, what have we got on the show today?
Well, for one of the first times ever on Learning Now TV, we've got 3 women as the 3 key interviewees during the programme. First one is Cathy Miller, our own Cathy Miller, talking about her LPI award, amongst other things. Then we've got Emma Weber from Australia, from Sydney, Australia, talking about AI, her AI bot, M. And finally, Paige Chan, who runs an LMS company in the United States. So 3 strong women with 3 good stories to tell from 3 completely different locations in the world. What's not to like about that, Kate?
Absolutely nothing. I hope you all enjoy it too.
Enjoy the show. It's my huge pleasure today to speak to Cathy Miller. Now, Cathy's in the news because she is the winner of the Learning Leader of the Year at the recent Learning and Performance Institute Learning Awards, and that's fantastic. Cathy is also a critical care nurse, and she works for organ donation and transplant, or NHS blood and transplant as it's known affectionately. And Cathy is head of education there, but she was seconded to work on the training for the opt-out legislation around the ability to give organ donation. So the default is to donate, and you have to opt out rather than the previous legislation, which is the other way round. And that is known as Max and Kira's law. So that was the project that she was working on when she was made the Learning Leader of the Year. So I want to talk about all of that with Cathy. But first of all, can I say welcome to Learning Now Television, Cathy?
Thank you, Nigel, and thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure, genuine pleasure. So let's just talk about the work you did on that project, Max and Kira's Law. What were you doing? Who are the training materials designed for?
The training materials were designed for all 300 specialist nurses that we have working for organ donation and tissue donation throughout the UK. So the ask was to design a robust training programme so that those nurses felt very comfortable in having sensitive conversations with donor families and incorporating the new legislation into that end-of-life conversation.
So what you did was critically important to make that, essentially to make that legislation work.
Yes, it was important. The law was written and passed through Parliament. And then another crucial stage for that law to be effective and see the realisation of lives being saved and improved, it had to work in the clinical context. So those professionals out there, the specialist nurses working with the doctors on intensive care and meeting families, they needed to understand the principles of the law and how to apply it sensitively.
Yes, and I think that word sensitively is incredibly important. This is incredibly difficult, and it must be really stressful for everyone, for the family and for the nurses who are essentially doing the negotiations with the families. And you managed to produce the material that allowed that whole process to move forward probably much more smoothly than it, or maybe even to help it move forward at all, there alone much more smoothly. So congratulations on that. How long was that project? How long did it last?
The project itself was a whole year to develop the materials. So it took time to build the materials, to test them, and to actually train our colleagues. And we had 3 modules of training. One was a module on the legislation and the principles and the guiding principles. So as well as the law, our regulators, the Human Tissue Authority, we worked with very closely. And when I say we, this whole project was a project team, and I had working alongside me a legislation change team. So a small team of us, 7 people, working with our wider professional development team to deliver the training. And we were afforded a lot of time and resource to do it properly, which was really, really good within a project framework. So testing the materials was key, and we did that with critical colleagues, if you like. We asked for critical friends to come and join us from the palliative care world. So we have professors and doctors and nurses from palliative care, donor family representatives come and see those materials and give us feedback and be really honest in their feedback. And that was a really risk, if you like, because it was, have we got it right? And, you know, we're kind of sharing this with the wider palliative care community, but actually it was really beneficial, and there was mutual learning. And although we're working in different fields, there were lots of similarities. So it was really good to get their positive feedback.
I bet. So from that project, 1 year in a very small, tight team, doing incredibly sensitive work that you knew was going to essentially define whether the legislation was a success or a failure. What have you learnt during that project that you've taken back into your substantive role in NHS blood and transplant?
I've really learnt a lot by working under a project framework and having a dedicated team to work on one particular aspect of the training, but to do it in a very robust way. So as a leader for that team, it was really clear that we had a vision. We were all working to a legislation change. We had a date, and we just worked back, and it was a compelling vision. It was Max and Kira's law. So we worked back then on our timelines, and the first thing we did was a training needs analysis. So the workforce are very experienced communicators. So we sent out a training needs analysis to say, what is it you want from this education? We know that you're experienced communicators. The law's changed. What is it that's going to help you? And absolutely everything that came back in terms of, we want to practice this conversation. We want some resources at hand to help us. We want the training to be interactive and useful, not just PowerPoint slides. And the only thing that we hadn't really accounted for that they fed back was, we'd like some video logs. And that's something that we incorporated into the training, some hypothetical scenarios at that point, because we hadn't gone live with the law. These were, what if this happened? What if that happened?
That's really exciting and incredibly powerful. And I'm so glad that you didn't go in straight away with patronising the target group and saying, you need to know this. You went in and said, what is it we can do that can help you most? And you worked in that student-centred or learner-centred design way. And that obviously paid off as you went through. Did it change your leadership, going back in as a team leader for the education team in blood and transplant? Did it help you as a leader?
It was managing and leading a smaller team, and it had different challenges. So managing and leading a bigger team remotely can be more difficult because you've got more people, they're more remote. It's hard to keep that kind of person-centered kind of leadership style. So a smaller team can help in some ways regards that. But in terms of my leadership style, it remained the same intrinsically. I learned and developed working in a project framework and really developed my skills around the importance and the value of creating a clear vision, giving people something really clear to work to, and being collaborative in that development about how we're going to do it. So working together to say, this is what we've got to achieve, and by when, how are we going to do it? We can all work together in that mix and work that out. And we were able to develop a real robust training program, like I say. So we had the training needs analysis, We did a comprehensive literature search, and I think that was helped because I'm currently studying a doctorate in education, so it was linked with my research. And I think that's really important for a leader to be a reader and to have that evidence base to what you do. So it was important for us to look wider and see this law was already implemented in Wales in 2015. What have we learnt? What can we build on? And where could we do things even better by their example? So we built on evidence from Wales, and that was that not to underestimate a behavioural change. This is a big change for people, for the population, for our workforce. It really takes time. So we built 3 modules: a theory module of the law, a practical shared practice module, and then we did a consolidation module. And this spanned from the autumn to the next spring till the law went live. So it was a very incremental approach, and it centered around a theoretical framework known as Bloom's taxonomy. So we started at the very lower level of that pyramid, looking at the inclusion and exclusion criteria for deemed consent, and then built up on that the more kind of analysis and evaluation. And finally, when we got to the top of the pyramid with the higher cognitive learning, we really seen people now, and we are, our workforce, our specialist nurses, adopting that creative level, and they're coming up with their own solutions to the problems or navigating the conversation as they see best. And I think it's that kind of incremental learning, that blended approach of sharing practice, practicing the conversation with actors, doing quizzes, having video logs, and all of that really helps.
It also means, Kathy, that you're giving them tools to build their own learning going forward. You're not saying you walk away from these 3 modules, you need to learn nothing more about this for the rest of your life. You're actually saying, here we are giving you skills and competencies that will allow you to carry on and develop and improve and share back to the next generation of nurses who've got to implement this law. And I think that's absolutely admirable and really good practice. But just let's go back a little bit. You're a critical care nurse. You went back into the wards in the height of the pandemic to continue to use your extraordinary skills. How was that? What that experience of going from a kind of theoretical world, in a sense, to an intensely, viscerally practical world? Was that experience good or just incredibly challenging and scary?
I think it was good and incredibly challenging on equal measure. So I haven't been in intensive care as an ITU nurse for probably 20 years, and am very much now working at the theoretical level. As a specialist nurse in organ donation, we do go out into intensive care. So I'm very familiar with the environment, but not practically applying those skills. And, you know, people had said, you know, it is the same, but different. You know, the monitors are the same, the equipment, the ventilators. And it's surprising on one hand how little things have changed. And it is a bit like riding a bike, although the bike's a bit rusty and a wheel or two could fall off. But I really look back now and I'm really glad that I helped out in that experience. I think it's a moment in history and something to tell the grandchildren that I did. And it was really nice to be out there working in that environment, in intensive care, in such a camaraderie, a real team spirit. The hierarchies were flattened. It didn't matter if you were working with the consultant or sharing your break with the cleaner. Everybody was on this kind of equal footing. Everybody was out there to do the best they could for all the poorly patients that we've seen. And that was something new to me, looking after patients for days and weeks on end with COVID. Yeah, so sometimes on intensive care units, the patient care turns around quite quickly. People are only in post-op for a couple of days, but all of these patients had COVID and were there for a long time. And I think the benefit of it going in, although you're kind of redeployed after being out of it for 20 years, you give a fresh experience, you have a fresh energy and a fresh passion to work around people that are really tired and, you know, really having
exhausted.
to do this day in, day out. So to help in some small way was good, and to connect with the shop floor, as it were, once again.
I think we should definitely say thank you for doing that, because you volunteered. No one put a gun to your head and said you've got to do it, and the fact that you did that is enormously generous. What have you taken back into your substantive role? You know, what did you learn during those weeks in intensive care that you can change the way that you work in your normal job? Has there been any insights that you've got?
It gave me even greater insight. I see myself as very kind of people-centered, the people I work with, my team, the people that are impacted by my training. I feel very much the hearts and minds is a really important side of it. And that was even more insightful being out on intensive care and seeing that in the organisation I work for, NHS Blood and Transplant, education and training isn't seen as a one-off thing or something if we've got time for. It's a real valued part, and we really do value our staff and make sure they have the appropriate training and education. And out in intensive care, seeing the staff working like they do and how they actually fit time in for education and training is very difficult. So it made me think about their education and training and the nurses coming through and their competency booklets and how they find the time. And for them, I think digital learning, online learning is probably even more key. I see nurses at the bedsides with their computers, trying to do mandatory training, trying to fit it in amongst their jobs. So I feel really privileged that I work in an organisation that values education and training and commits time for its staff development.
Yeah, so it sort of reinforced the message of what you do and why you do it, and who benefits and why they benefit, and what the impact of that is on the general public. Cathy, it's really been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for giving me your time. Congratulations again on becoming Learning Leader of the Year. And from just in the few minutes that we've been talking, I don't think there's anybody who's listening who wouldn't say that's richly deserved. You've had an amazing learning journey over the last 18 months. And thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you. It's been a huge privilege, honestly. Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you.
Our learning experiences unlock potential, transform the performance of people and organisations, and help millions around the world build happy and successful careers. We change lives with evidence-based learning that works, sparking real change for real impact.
Robin Hoyle is back, and 100 marks to Robin for every month he comes up with something really interesting and controversial. And this month he's talking about confidence-based assessment. Don't test people's knowledge, that's a waste of time. Test their ability to handle problems and come up with solutions. Very practical, very interesting, and Robin explains it very well.
I want to share a couple of insights with you from some work I've been doing on confidence-based assessments. Now, if you're not familiar with a confidence-based assessment, what it does is it gives you a series of options to respond to a question, and then asks you how confident that you are that you've chosen the right or the best or the most appropriate response. And we did that using a scenario-based activity. So we created a scenario, we asked people a series of questions about how they would respond in different stages of that scenario as it unfolded, and we, after each question, asked them how confident they were that they'd chosen the best or the optimum response. So that gave us 4 outcomes against a series of dimensions, the skills and behaviours that we were looking to assess. And those outcomes were confidently correct, in other words, I'd chosen the right response and I knew I had, through to confidently incorrect. In other words, I got the answer wrong, but I thought I was right. In the middle, we had people who were low confidence but correct, so they'd chosen the right response, but they didn't know that they had, or low confidence and incorrect, so they'd chosen the wrong response, but they kind of understood that they hadn't got that right. And we found a really interesting parallel where we then asked a selection of those people to go through a role-play case study, one-to-one, with a senior manager who they didn't work with, playing the role of a customer. So we created a new scenario, we set this meeting up online, and then we observed what people did, what they said, when they said it, what behaviours they chose to use at various points. What we found that was quite heartening was that the people who did well on the online assessment, the multiple choice questions with confidence ratings, did well in the case study, the role play. So that was nice because it kind of validated the approach to say that there was some connection between the performance and the outcome of the assessment. What we also found, which was really interesting, was that those people who were correct but low confidence, in other words, they got the right answers but they weren't certain that they got the right answers, did less well in the case study than people who were low confident and incorrect. So in other words, if I knew that I didn't know the answer, I was able to kind of work out ways of doing things in the case study, in the role play, where if I knew the right answer but was uncertain of what I was doing, I was somehow limited in being able to make the appropriate responses at the appropriate time. And a lot of programs that we deliver, and I'm sure that you deliver as well, are quite heavily focused on the knowledge element, teaching people what they should do. But I wonder how much time and effort we spend on making them confident to back their own abilities, to back their intuition. In our example, what we found is that people who were low confidence and incorrect were able to work out a way of responding more appropriately to a given set of stimulus than the people who were knowledgeable but didn't really believe in their own knowledge and understanding of the situation or what they should do. So our focus in future is going to be towards building as much confidence as we can in people, as well as giving them the knowledge. And I commend it to you. It's a really interesting way of thinking about learning and thinking about preparing people for the world of work that they're going back to. Focus on confidence, at least as much as knowledge, if not maybe a bit more so.
Maybe we'll do that later. Hey, so you can see this is just like using a whiteboard in a classroom. And then you do my 3-year-old's favourite, you just have a nice little wiggle. 1, 2, 3, rate it now.
A really quick question, you might want to answer this later.
You see, I love this.
One of the really great pleasures of lockdown, if you can call lockdown a pleasure in any way, is that because we can't get to a studio, we are able to talk to guests from all over the world. And today, it's Sydney, Australia, and I'm very pleased to talk to Emma Weber. Emma is in a very gloomy and dark and rainy Sydney, which is not the usual way that you describe Sydney, but that's absolutely true today. And I'm here to talk to Emma about Coach M, which is a very, very interesting AI bot that she's developed. And Emma is the founder and CEO of Lever Transfer Learning. So welcome, Emma. It's really nice to see you today.
Absolute pleasure to be here, Nigel. Thank you.
Now, tell me about Coach M. How did it happen and how does it work, essentially?
Well, I am so committed to coaching. In fact, I've been called a coaching snob many times over, and our methodology for learning transfer is based around coaching. But one of my beliefs in coaching is that it's not about the individual having a conversation with one of my team. It's about the team member helping the participant have a conversation with themselves. You know, the whole internal reflection, it's your thoughts, feelings, values, fears, beliefs that control your behaviors. So one day I was chatting to a team member and I was saying, remember, you know, it's about helping the participant have a conversation with themselves. And that team member said to me, well, Em, if that's true, why can't AI do it? And I immediately said, no, never. That would never work, not in my lifetime. and realized I'd gone into that horrible sort of defensive place as a leader where you're no longer listening because you're so convinced you're right. And at that point, I thought, okay, well, let's just pause on this and investigate and get curious. And it was about the same time I came across our tech partners based out of Utah in the US, Mobile Coach. So we've been working with them for 4 years now. And really just the whole thing snowballed from there. But even, Nigel, at the very, very beginning, once we'd created just a very rough mock-up prototype with a few different ideas. And I was chatting with the client, the formal meeting had finished. We're at that stage where you're just, finishing your coffees and chit-chatting. And I said, have a look at this I've been playing around with. And the client said, I love it. We want it. And I just did the, seriously? You really think people are going to talk to this? And they were like, yes, let's give it a go. So throughout the whole journey, people have been sort of prying this product from my hands. And it's only really been in the last year I've gone, okay, we've got proof, we've got studies, we've got things that show this. People do talk to Co-Cham. They want to talk to Co-Cham. They want to slow down and reflect. So
you talk to Co-Cham, Emma, through text, through whatever, messages, basically. So
it's either SMS or something like Microsoft Teams or Slack, or we've just gone into WhatsApp as well.
Right.
So it's a written, although we did, Nigel, funnily enough, have a participant in France who decided to use Siri to talk his text messages to him. And then he spoke to Siri to get Siri to then type his text messages to Co-Cham. And at our end, where we saw it typed, you could not tell that he had used voice to go to text.
Yeah. So that's another option. And
option.
If you're driving your car, you're better off having a conversation with Co-Cham than trying to text Co-Cham, aren't you? Yeah. So
and I think that's what was happening. Yeah.
Yes. Are you going to facilitate that? Are you going to put that as a feature?
Maybe in the future. I think the texting is actually going really, really well at the moment. So I've no doubt that it will head towards voice. But I think people are using text and
it's second nature now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, how does it work? What is the AI? Where people talk about AI and it's a whole bunch of stuff. Yeah. Have you written the branching so that every single response has been written by you, or is it beginning to learn as it gets responses and beginning to pull from a knowledge base which is continuously growing and developing?
So we have purposely opted not to have machine learning within Co-Cham at this stage. What we want to do is we really want to keep the integrity of what we're trying to achieve and also really kind of keep control over the process. So anytime there is a possible sort of machine learning or there's an opportunity where someone says something that we weren't expecting or doesn't quite flow, we get human eyes on it and we decide whether we want to include that or not. We might see how many times it comes up. So we're managing it quite closely in the back end as it evolves. But it does evolve all the time.
How often do you update Co-Cham then? Is it something you do every day, every week, every month?
Definitely every week. And there's one of my team that's looking at it on a daily basis and maybe doing small, we review it once a week and say, is there anything major we need to update? But we can do small updates as we go along.
So it's getting better.
Yeah.
And is it scalable? How many people could it handle? Could it handle thousands rather than tens? Or it could.
Yeah. And that's the fascinating thing that for me, when we started doing this work, we wanted to make coaching available to people across organizations, not just at the top level. We paired with training because then you've already had the insights and you're already getting very efficient then. But now to be able to do it completely scalable, it's quite I think it's exciting because I want people to be able to slow down and reflect and learn what it's like to be able to work things out for themselves when they may not have the privilege of being able to have a human person either digitally or on the end of the phone or on your conferencing calls.
I completely agree with you. Is it something that you would license so that if my company wanted it but didn't want anything else, it just wanted to license Co-Cham and build it into my own learning base or my own program of, say, leadership development, would you say no problem? Or would you say no, it's the whole package? It's part of a whole package.
No, that is the package. Is we do license to people. Yeah.
Right.
So
it can be standalone as well as integrated into your own your own development process?
Well, we don't have any programs, Nigel. So we only integrate with other people.
Right.
So that's what we design. That's what we design for. As an organization, we don't have any training programs unless we're doing training people in the methodology, which we do. But the majority of our work is partnering with others. So we partner with other people's leadership development programs. And it's either the training provider or the learning provider that comes to us and says, look, we want to supercharge our results and get data. Because, of course, that's the other great thing about being the conversational intelligence, that you can actually capture the data as you go through. And so it's so much easier to do the analysis of what's actually working, what's being put into place, what results people are getting, compared to when we had a human approach.
Yeah.
So yes,
it's like almost you've got a group of coaches who every hour or every day they sit around the table and say, what's going on, how we learn from this group, what should we do differently. You've got all that so that you everything is transparent, and therefore it can be shared amongst the team and amongst the learners, I guess, as well. So you've got this constant reflection and reinforcement going on that you don't necessarily get through a human coach.
Yeah. And we have different ways to manage that because of the confidentiality. So one of the big reasons that Co-Chem works so well is the high level of psychological safety. And some people have even said to us, we share more with Co-Chem than we would with a human. And there's studies that are starting to come through that actually show that people are more open in text message. So we don't want to offset that by people feeling, well, that data is going everywhere. So we can make sure that it's anonymized and, you're not able to identify people, all that.
So you just use it to learn from. You don't use it to put the finger on any individual.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can guarantee that, because which is difficult. It's actually easier to do it through a bot than it is through human beings, because you can prove that that's the case. Yeah,
but I think one of the interesting things that's starting to unfold is within any AI or chatbots is when you can augment that with a human service, you're actually then getting the best of both worlds. So we have this year started trialing people having some conversations with one of my human team members, my fabulous team members, and then some conversations with Co-Chem. So you're getting the Co-Chem for the momentum and the maintenance, and then you're getting the in-depth conversation and reflection where people can be stretched. So Co-Chem, it's hard for Co-Chem it stretches people to the level to which they want to be stretched, but it can't kind of read in between the lines and stretch in the same way as a human can. So you can get the best of both worlds when you put the two together.
Well, if anyone is listening to this and saying, I want to know more, have a look at the link on the screen. Please use that link and contact Emma. I think this is a really interesting, innovative, and really solid development. And it really embodies everything you believe in terms of coaching, doesn't it? It's an extension of the role that you've had for as long as I've ever known you. So I really hope it's successful. I'm sure even more successful. I think it is successful. It's remarkably successful already. But I hope that it's extended. It will be used by companies all around the world as a way of extending, developing, enriching their own developments. So Emma, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I hope the weather improves in Sydney and you see a bit of sunshine in the next few days. But there's certainly a lot of sunshine in terms of Co-Chem. So congratulations and thank you for talking to me.
Thank you, Nigel. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Next up, Michelle Parry-Slater continues our series with the Charity Learning Consortium, looking at learning and development in the third sector. This month, she's talking to Peter Jones of the Stroke Association in how they've adapted through the pandemic.
Welcome to Learning Now TV. Again, we're here with our Charity Learning Consortium sponsored segment to speak to people who work in the third sector, and because they've got fantastic stories to tell that people in L&D from the private sector can actually learn from. Today, we're speaking to Peter Jones. Peter Jones from the Stroke Association. Hi, welcome to Learning Now TV. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your job?
Thank you, Michelle. So, as you said, my name is Peter Jones. I work in the Learning and Development team at the Stroke Association. We have 800 staff, approximately, and our team actually focuses mostly on internal training rather than external training. Obviously, the Stroke Association deals with people who've had stroke survivors, of which there are 1.2 million across the UK. And we're here to support them as they rebuild their lives after stroke.
Okay, so last year with COVID and all of that stuff going on, you had to obviously, like the rest of the world, change the support you give to your 800 staff. So do you want to talk us through, Peter, what sorts of things came out from the COVID response for you?
Yeah, it was a very interesting time. Actually, before COVID hit, we as a team had recognised the potential value of digital training. So prior to COVID, we'd focused mostly on face-to-face, but with 800 staff and very geographically displaced. So we had 19 offices and various other hubs and things across the country, everywhere from Southampton to Edinburgh, Wales and Northern Ireland too. So geographically, training presented a problem, not just logistically, but also in terms of expense and time as well. So we knew the value potentially of digital online training. It was just convincing other people that that was the case. So it was a combination really of people being fearful of the technology and also, I guess, a preconceived idea that face-to-face training somehow had more value. So once COVID hit, actually all bets were off. It was, we're going to have to do this. So rather than slow and steady as we'd planned, it hit us all at once, basically.
It's a very familiar story across many organisations throughout not just the UK, but the world, given the pandemic. And so you're saying there you've got already your geographical reasons, you've got some drivers, but you mentioned that not everybody was on board. So what did you do around that sort of stakeholder approach?
That's a really interesting question, because the perceptions obviously were just that, perceptions. It wasn't seen as valuable. We'd spent a lot of effort in terms of face-to-face to make courses more active, more facilitated rather than passive. And I think people had this idea that if they went online, it would just be listening to somebody with a PowerPoint. So it was overcoming those sort of things. So once everybody was on board with the technology, they had to be, we looked at making the online training as close as we possibly could to replicating what we'd done to the face-to-face. So making it as active as we possibly could, as engaging as we could.
And what sorts of things were you doing to make this active? You're absolutely right. I think that there is a perception that it'll be boring, but online doesn't need to be boring. It certainly doesn't have to be, in my experience anyhow. So what did you do to make it active, as you call it?
Well, the first thing actually was naming it, bizarrely. So replacing the word webinar with online training actually made a big difference. So yeah, the chat function on Skype actually helped us to encourage feedback, questions from people, and that helped them feel like they were part of it. When we developed away from Skype into other platforms, breakout rooms have been an absolute amazing thing. That enables people to replicate the discussions they would have in a training room. So they could go away in pairs or small groups, discuss, and then come back and feedback, or actually do something different in small groups as well. It's surprising. We've done coaching training, for example, which you would think could only be done face-to-face, but that has worked brilliantly online.
Perfect. So I hear what you're saying entirely, and I know that a lot of organisations have replicated this. You have done something a little bit different though, haven't you? You've brought in that concept of gamification, and I'd love to talk to you about how's that landed for you? What does it look like?
Yeah, so gamification can take many forms. Quizzes, simple quizzes as icebreakers. We have people coming into the room We have things published that they can interact with, like we've got Hangman, we've got Alpha Nums, name pickers, all those sort of things. But actually, whiteboards are quite a good tool as well. So being able to put Post-its on and so on. But I think what you're after, Michelle, is the fact that we've started creating things for e-learning, which are more engaging, more interactive. So one example of which would be for a fraud module that we developed in-house. We had a policy on it, which was obviously quite dull material, but very important to get across. So we developed the idea of having a game, a bit like Beetle Drive. I don't know whether people are familiar with Beetle Drive, where you roll a dice against your opponents, and you have to be the first, basically, to draw a beetle. So if you roll a 6, you draw the body, roll a 1, you draw the head, and so on. Well, we adapted that to the 6 elements of the policy, and we put the dice element in, and the people were basically playing against the computer, the AI, and would be the first to try and get a jigsaw piece, and they had to be the first to get the 6 jigsaw pieces. So actually what we've discovered is we can do that for e-learning. We can actually publish that now as well and use it within our Adobe webinar platform as well. So people can use that as part of the online training as well.
Okay, so you're describing there my childhood parties of the 70s and 80s, where we had to fight for chocolate, but you're obviously here fighting for policy puzzle pieces, which is excellent news to hear. Do not people say it's a little bit childish? Where do you get off, with that kind of, isn't it a bit silly to be doing things like that? Peter, talk me through, because you've had a really great response to this gamified approach to your online learning and your e-learning. Is it childish?
That's a really good question. And yeah, there have been a few people, and it's always before they do it. So it's always when they hear about it rather than actually getting involved. I think it's like most things as an adult, isn't it? It sounds like it's something for children, maybe. So you get a preconceived idea. But actually, once people are involved in the things, particularly with quizzes and things which, again, when you're on the surface, you think, these sound really childish. People throw themselves into it, get really involved, to the point where actually with that fraud module we were talking about, people actually refer to it as the jigsaw module.
Excellent, excellent. So you're really smashing through those ideas that actually gamification or fun online is not for adult learning, but actually it really is. And I know that you've got Space Invaders coming up now for your next development, which is really exciting. Peter, thank you so much for talking to us today about what you've been doing at the Stroke Association. And for you out there watching Learning Now TV, just see how simple things can really change, better use of the chat, using quizzes and landing people into online learning in a way that's fun. And it's great to hear if they can do it at the Stroke Association, then we can all be trying these things as well. Until next time on Learning Now TV, thanks very much.
DPG's online courses are designed to fit around your life, so you can study anytime, anywhere. Get in touch now for more info.
Welcome, Paige Chan. Paige is the CEO of Remote Learner, and she's built up a really interesting and successful company. So I'm very grateful that you agreed to talk to me today, Paige. But first of all, let's start by telling us a little bit more about the company. How long has it been going? What are your big selling points? What makes you special?
Yeah, Remote Learner has been around for a long time. Our founder, Brian Williams, actually started the company, under different names, but like back in the 80s, doing educational video. So really, the history goes back quite a while. I've had the opportunity of working with Remote Learner for now on 11 years, and just recently, with the acquisition by Learning Pool, was promoted into the CEO position. Allowing me to be the now 4th CEO in the history of the company, starting with, like I said, Brian Williams, our founder. who Brian was arguably, if not the first, close to the first Moodle partner with Martin DeGiamis back in the day, and really sort of embracing the idea of open source e-learning. And really saw a vision for that throughout his career and certainly his legacy. And that continued on with Jason Cole. Dr. Cole was our second CEO. He really came very strongly out of the EDU focus, believed a lot in the open university approach. And then recently, my predecessor, Mr. Ron Olson, really came in to sort of mature the company from being a very grassroots open source e-learning, like so many of the Moodle organizations are, and really professionalize the organization.
Just tell us who your customers are, mainly. Are you still in EDU, or are you just span across, corporate, big, small, not-for-profit? Where are you in all of that?
So we're probably about 40% still in the EDU space. Our growth has been largely in the corporate, non-for-profit government sector. So in the last few years, I would say maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, we were probably closer to 60% in the EDU space. Our revenue is not really shifted across the board, just the makeup of our customers, right? So we've seen that trend in the industry sort of evolving. A lot of the bigger EDU LMS players came in really strong in the last about 5 years or so. So we've seen a lot with organizations like Canvas and D12 really shifting the marketplace on the EDU side. Where we've continued to see strength in EDU really is where it aligns to our corporate professional development mindset. So a lot of remote learners customers in that EDU space are going to be in your community colleges or your 2-year career and technical schools, or kind of on that other spectrum in sort of the graduate professional private universities that are really focused on giving people the skills they need for employment.
Yes. What if I'm a potential customer? What would make me turn to you as opposed to any of the other providers, big, medium, or small? There are, I think, something like 122 LMSs out there. So why are you different, and what makes you different?
Well, there's probably going to be another LMS launched before the end of this interview. At the rate that they're hitting the market, where we really like to see ourselves as being kind of a differentiator is in the partnership approach. So it has more to do with the services and the relationship that we build with our customers. I think on average, our accounts, most of them have been with us for over 7 years. And that's really unheard of in any technology stack. The opportunity to change is there. And we really like to work collaboratively with our customers on the opportunity to evolve and to scale their solutions. So they get that appetite for change, but they have the consistency of the partnership relationship. And I think that's where we've seen the growth. Our number one source for new business is referrals from current customers. And I think that says a lot.
So where does the future go? Is it more of the same, or you think that not-for-profit, small business, government business, that's the kind of growth area that you're following, and you think that will continue to become a bigger and bigger part of what you do?
I think we have the opportunity to not have to differentiate too specific in that regard. So education has been our roots, and we're not gonna abandon it. We have a very strong base in that space. And for remote learner, I think our roots in education really help to inform and enrich the instructional strategies that we bring to our corporate customers, because we bring that deeper educational theory and instructional theory methodology into our approach. So we've really seen some really creative corporate solutions that we're able to build. And even in your more instructor-led, synchronous type of training environments, where we're able to parallel some of the approaches that we take with the university faculties or with professional training colleges. I do believe that the evolution of the technology is going to drive the market in that space. And by that, I think data is king, right? So the degree to which these isolated learning management solutions, even the ones used by universities, where you had the connection that brought the learner into the space, but then it was all inside of that bubble. That bubble is being shattered, and that now the data layer, as the team at Learning Pool calls it, you have your data layer that it sort of is that base of everything else, and where does the content layer sit? That's your instructional approach, your theory, your downright content itself. But now the experience layer, which is what I've always been passionate about. My own research has been in designing of that experience layer. And there's so much that we're seeing in the shift in the market, whether it is bringing in that experience layer into the LMS, or whether it's platforms like the learning experience platforms that are kind of growing in the market and growing in popularity, that really have to leverage the other two, right? That experience platform only works if you have good data interoperability.
Completely right. Completely right.
So it really brings it full circle. And I think that's going to result in a shift in the market. We're already having universities that are asking us about incorporating an LXP into their environments, which, many would have thought, oh, that's not going to happen. That's just a corporate environment. And that's not the case. I think that really opens up the opportunity that we can specialize in what we do, not necessarily in who we do it for, and not limit ourselves in that regard.
I think that's right. And I also think that suddenly universities are much more sensitive to the needs of remote learners and to doing a much better job at building learning communities rather than just shoveling content at them. And if you're acting both as a provider and an advisor, that creates a much richer conversation, I would think, with your customers, your key customers. And I guess you're also in the unique position of being able to take things that work in corporate, for example, and say, well, you could do this in Edu, or things that work really well in Edu, and say, hey, have you ever thought about doing this? So you can help encourage both sides to almost meet in the middle with a richer, more successful learning environment. Would you say that's a kind of USP? Not many bridge that gulf between Edu and business organizations.
Yeah, I think it's been really great for us. We've been small enough and nimble enough that we haven't really split our teams. So we've got our experts working in both markets based upon just the needs of the customers coming in the door. I think there are other organizations that even if they have an EDU product and they have a corporate product, they almost operate like two totally separate divisions, and the two have completely separate roadmaps and the worlds are different. We've really maintained kind of that blended team and that blended approach. Well, we've been, small enough to do so, under 40 employees for the last several years, which has really allowed us to kind of find that melting pot of both platform and strategy to enrich those experiences for our clients.
So big optimism, big opportunities, and I hope that we hear a lot more about remote learner this side of the Atlantic. So the very best. I hope you have a very flourishing and symbiotic relationship with the rest of the Learning Pool family. And it's been a delight talking to you, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Paige.
Excellent. Thank you, Nigel.
Well, that's it for another great show, our first show in April. Nigel, what stood out for you today?
What I really enjoyed was talking to Emma about her virtual coach called M. And it's quite brilliant. She basically uses M, or she encourages others to use M, as a way of reinforcing the learning from events, leadership events, or whatever kind of development events. And M keeps you on task, helps you negotiate your intended outcomes and your action plan, and generally chivies you along. And M has proved unbelievably successful. A number of her clients have come back and said they'd much rather have M than a human coach, because M never gets it wrong, turns up on time, is absolutely focused, no rabbiting on about anything stupid, just straight in there. And it's very, very well done, very well engineered. And because they're learning all the time, M becomes more interesting, more useful, and more encouraging as every week goes by, because they're re-scripting constantly in the light of what they found. So I thought that was absolutely terrific, and maybe a harbinger of things to come, that Emma's put a finger on something that is actually going to be much more important in the future.
I would 100% agree. I mean, that's absolutely, I mean, the Fosway research would bear that out in terms of where AI is starting to have real potential. And David Perring talks about the kind of the virtual coaching thing a lot. But, you know, I'm somebody, you know, I appreciate being nudged, because I'm a very busy person and I maybe don't make time for things and I always have deadlines. So actually a nudge, whether it comes from, you know, a virtual coach or a real person, it has equal value, you know, to stop, reflect, take time, etc. So yeah, I think it's very exciting.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it also just proves that the idea that it's not either or. AI is a partner. It works alongside something more recognizable and conventional, but it adds huge amounts of value. That's the message. And Emma demonstrates that perfectly.
I read something recently, I think it was a Deloitte piece of research around super teams, and they were talking about the super teams of the future will be, you know, the machines and the people together, and how you treat AI as a team member, basically.
Yeah. Just in the way, you know, my laptop is a bit of intelligent support for me. I couldn't manage without it. My phone is a bit of intelligent support for me. It's not an amazing leap to then get something that is more intelligent and more of a direct support and has a bit more nous about it than my poor old phone or laptop, isn't it? It's just an extension of where we are. Yeah. So, right, what have we got coming up? Any conferences worth mentioning?
There are. I'm going to check my notes so I get the dates right.
Yes.
So we have a few virtual events coming up. So our friends at the Learning Guild have Learning Solutions running from the 3rd to the 14th of May online. Definitely check that out. I think we've given the Learning Guild a shout out the last couple of episodes, because they've had so much great stuff, and it's all free if you register.
It is, yeah, just sign up.
Yeah, can't urge you to do that enough. 17th to the 23rd of May is Good Old Learning at Work Week. So obviously people are learning at home at work this year, so it will be interesting to see how that goes. Then 15th to the 17th of June, our friends at the CIPD are running their Festival of Work, which is online. And then very exciting, the 8th and 9th of September, our friends at LPI, the Learning Performance Institute, are running Learning Live, hopefully as a face-to-face event in person.
That will be amazing. That would be so exciting. The fact that we're even saying as a face-to-face event, as if that is the most exciting news of all, just shows how the world has changed. Great, Kate. So,
who'd have thought it?
Indeed. See you at the end of the month. Bye.
29th of April. Bye.
29th of April.